Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mind Mortality podcast series. My name is Quinn Jacobson. This series explores how human beings confront the one fact we cannot escape, that we are going to die, and how creativity becomes one of the ways we metabolize that awareness. These episodes follow the arc of my soon-to-be-published books, Glass Bones, Rupture, and In the Shadow of Sun Mountain. I'm tracing the psychological architecture that underlines culture, art, identity, and meaning itself. This is Season 1, Glass Bones, Episode 2, Part 1, Introduction. Part 1 of Glass Bones is called How Mortality Awareness Shapes the Mind, Culture, and the Stories We Live Inside. Before we move into the evolutionary rupture coming up in Chapter 1, this section lays the foundation. It asks a simple but destabilizing question. What if mortality awareness is not a philosophical abstraction, but the hidden architecture underneath being human? When I think about where this inquiry began for me, I don't start with Ernest Becker or Otto Rank or my doctoral research. I go back to a low-income apartment complex on Madison Avenue in Ogden, Utah. I was a kid tagging along with my father while he checked on tenants there. The people who lived there were pushed to the margins, forgotten by most of the world, but unforgettable to me. Something about their faces, their struggles, and their dignity lodged in me before I had language for it. I didn't know it then, but I was being introduced to the human condition in its rawest form. The way suffering and resilience occupy the same body. Years later, when I found What Collodion, I recognized that same structure in the process itself. Fragility, imperfection, abandonment, presence that wasn't polished. I wrote in an artist statement for one of my early exhibitions that the process's imperfections echo our human imperfections. Eventually, I realized these weren't isolated fascinations. They were connected to something deeper. The questions I was circling: why do we suffer? Why do we turn away from death? And what does meaning look like when everything falls apart? Were not personal quirks. They were structural. They were human. Part 1 lays out that structure directly. It moves from lived experience to evolutionary psychology, from Becker's philosophical insight to terror management theory's empirical research, and into contemporary extensions like Rachel and Ross Menzies' book, Mortals. Instead of paraphrasing it further, I want to read a portion directly from Part 1 so you can hear the architecture in the language of the book itself. We all know we're going to die. That knowledge sits quietly behind everything we do, shaping how we work, build, plan, love, dream, and ache, even when we're not fully conscious of it. Usually we don't feel that truth directly. The psyche evolved to keep that awareness at a distance so we can function. Ernest Becker understood this better than almost anyone. He wrote that the idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It's a blunt line, but it captures the hidden background of human life, the quiet hum of death anxiety that influences everything from identity to culture to the ways we defend meaning. Becker showed that culture isn't decoration, it's armor. We build symbolic worlds to protect ourselves from the unbearable weight of mortality awareness. When those worlds feel threatened, we react as if our lives are at stake, because symbolically they are. Terror management theory took Becker's insights and tested them empirically. Even subtle reminders of death change how people behave. We defend our worldviews more aggressively, cling to in-groups more tightly, and reject those who threaten our symbolic structures. What Becker described philosophically, research demonstrated scientifically. More recently, Rachel and Ross Menzies traced how death anxiety shapes contemporary life. Mortality avoidance structures the modern world. Our funerals, our technology, our cosmetic rituals, our violence, and our endless attempts to control what can't be controlled. This book is my attempt to lay out that structure, the evolutionary rupture that made us aware of death, the psychological mechanisms we build to protect ourselves, and the cultural stories we cling to when those mechanisms strain, and the creative paths that open when those stories collapse. We begin with the evolutionary moment when Homo sapiens gained the capacity to see itself from the outside and reorganize its own ending. That rupture created an unbearable psychological pressure. Neurological denial emerged alongside awareness as a survival mechanism, softening the voltage of existential terror without erasing it. But neurological denial alone wasn't enough. It had to become cultural. Culture gives us meaning, heroism, and continuity. It tells us who we are, what matters, and why our brief time counts. These aren't abstractions, they're psychological necessities. Worldviews function as armor against the knowledge of death. When they're threatened, we react with the intensity of creatures whose survival is at stake. But that armor is fragile. Every symbolic system eventually strains under its own limitations. When meaning structures collapse, people face a choice: cling harder to old stories, fall into despair, or create something new. Artists often choose the third path. So that's the foundation of part 1: mortality awareness, psychological buffering, cultural armor, and the instability built into every symbolic system we construct. The argument here is not abstract, it's architectural. If mortality awareness is the pressure, culture is the structure built to contain it. But containment is never permanent. Every worldview eventually strains under the weight placed on it. And that's where the creative question enters. Artists often work at the edges where denial thins, not because they're immune to anxiety, and not because they're braver, but because their medium requires proximity to instability. The fracture becomes visible, the story wavers, the material resists. Part 1 ends at that threshold. Once you understand the machinery of defense, evolutionary rupture, neurological denial, cultural armor, you can ask a more specific question. What does it mean to live creatively inside that structure? How does art become a way of bearing the unbearable? That's where part 2 begins. But before we move there, we have to go further back. In the next episode, we step into chapter 1, the rupture, when Homo sapiens awaken to its own ending. That's where mortality awareness becomes not just psychological, but evolutionary. That's where the pressure begins. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening.